that how long we record?
I don't know. It's always a mystery.
All right, let's do it.
Cool. Alrighty, sir. Thank you very much for coming in to do this.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah. So let's get started. What's your full name?
Ryan Evans.
Are you named after anybody?
No.
Okay. And where are you from?
I grew up here in town in Encino, California.
Nice.
Yeah.
What was it like growing up here?
You know, people ask me that a lot, especially because I've spent my entire adult life outside of California. And I think a lot of people are curious about what it's like to grow up in LA. Maybe you've run into the same thing when you travel, but I don't really have a basis for comparison. It was nice, comfortable, grew up very fortunate, great weather.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Nice. Do you have both your parents?
Yeah.
And what did they do?
My dad's a shrink.
Okay.
He's a psychologist. And my mother is a hypnotherapist.
Oh, wow. They practice on you?
No. Yeah, I mean, you know them. So,
yeah. Just for me, it's just a matter of like trying to generalize, like documenting the questions.
No, they don't. Yeah.
Do you have any siblings?
Younger brother, Zach.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what does Zach do?
Zach he runs the Southern California office for a company called Fuda.
Okay.
So a lot of business development, sales, that kind of stuff.
Sweet. You guys close?
We are.
Nice. Awesome, man. You grow up close?
Not really. I was, I'm 4.5 years older than him.
Okay.
And I think it was like a little too far to be real close. And also I would say I was a pretty violent older brother.
Okay.
And he became a D1 athlete. He's a lot strong and became a lot stronger than me, I think, starting many years ago. But he did not take revenge, which I will forever be grateful for.
Nice. Yeah. Cool. So growing up here, it was nice. It was sunny. What kind of things were you into when you were younger?
A lot of reading. I played sports, but very badly.
Okay.
But I was mostly into reading and, I don't know. What are kids into? I was a really bookish kid.
Okay.
Starting from probably 9 or 10, I was really into reading fiction.
Okay.
Everything from detective novels to other sorts of stuff, spy novels, that kind of a thing.
Sweet.
So I would say that was definitely the biggest thing I was into as a kid.
Nice.
Yeah.
Did you travel much growing up?
A little bit, mostly different places around the country. I think my first international trip was when I was a teenager to Italy with my parents and my brother.
Cool.
So that really opened my eyes. I know you lived out there for a while as well.
Yeah.
And then I ended up studying abroad there when I was in college. So that was a real eye-opening experience.
Honestly, it's my favorite country in the world and like my favorite culture in the world. I feel like Italian people are so much fun.
Yeah, they are.
And the lifestyle is great. I love that they have like the month of August off just to be like, fuck it, man, we're living.
They know how to live.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's great. So that's a cool first experience to get for traveling international. I'm assuming with school it was probably like an English kind of preference as opposed to any other subjects.
Yeah, so I went to Loyola Chicago.
Okay.
And they have a campus in Rome. So I did that first semester. So it was all in
Sweet.
English. We took Italian, but it was all the courses except for the Italian courses were in English.
Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. What was your first job?
Camp counselor.
Okay.
Here in town.
Cool.
Yeah.
Just a day
First
camp?
and still my favorite job. Just
Yeah?
a day camp. Same camp I went to since I was 4. And starting at the age of 14, I started working there for, I think, 7 summers.
Nice.
Great job. I'm still waiting for a job that lives up to that.
What was so great about it?
You know, it was very cool to have grown up in that environment and then to play the other role. So to grow up, I don't know for any listeners of the show that went to summer camp, the esteem you hold your counselors on when you're a kid is pretty major.
Oh, yeah.
They're just like heroes.
For sure.
And to be that for kids was pretty cool too. And to, get to show them these amazing experiences. I was a head of a group where we took them surfing and to the beach and all, rock climbing and all this stuff. So that was just really rewarding.
Awesome.
And I met some really close friends, including a couple I'm still very close with to this day.
Cool, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a buddy. We did an episode. It was actually one of the first episodes I did with my friend Noah, and he was a camp counselor who's still, I think it's almost, well, COVID was the setback, but every year goes and like connects with the same group and sometimes like still goes back to the camp. And it's amazing, like the relationships and the closeness that comes from, just being away and being out in nature with a bunch of people.
Yeah, generally much more, they say you don't stay in touch with a lot of friends from school because they were just people you were around at a certain time in life. But it's the same with camp. You don't really choose the people you go to camp with. But I just think the atmosphere is different. If it's a well-run camp, it's of a positive environment, the range of activities you get to do instead of just sitting at a desk looking forward. So yeah, some of the best memories of my life, both when I was a camper and as a counselor.
Awesome. So you were surfing.
No, terribly.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you
I
took
took the
kids.
I took the kids out there and they got up on the surfboards. I tried a couple times and realized that, like most physical activities, I wasn't going to be very good at it. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's you at least you got the book smarts. You
Yeah.
know? So you go from camp counselor, and what's the next job you have after that?
what was the next job I had after that? So I did as camp counselor. I graduated college and then I moved to DC.
Okay.
And the plan was, of course, to do great things. I went to my first year of college was 9/11, which obviously shaped the worldview in a lot of people around my age. And went to DC hoping to do all these great things, thinking, oh, people are going to line up to hire me. Definitely didn't happen. And I ended up working in a temp job for a CFO of a union, which I hated, but I'm so glad I did that job because it taught me the value of just basic corporate business organization, which is something I've realized I would need to do again many years later. But that little taste of it was really nice. And yeah, it was a great job for what it was. It was temporary. I'm glad I did it. And then I went to go work for a think tank studying Islamist, terrorist, and extremist groups.
Whoa.
And so it was a big change of pace.
Yeah.
And did that for a few years.
What was that like?
Really educational. It was a very crazy time in world history, although I feel like it's never stopped being a crazy time in world history since 9/11.
I agree.
But this was sort of at the height of the Iraq War. Things were not going very well. And the surge was kicking off. And so we were tracking a lot of that. There were also some extremist groups active in the U.S. doing activism and fundraising at the time. We were tracking that too. Really, it was just a good place to learn about the subject matter that would define the first phase of my career. So there's a lot of writing, a lot of working with government officials. Not the best boss, but that was also educational as well.
Sure. That's amazing, man. I mean, what's more like the day-to-day of that job?
I mean, it's been a long time now, but basically we'd usually be working on some sort of written product, either for something internal to the organization or someone in the media or someone in government or someone on the Hill, that kind of a thing, on Capitol Hill.
Wow. Okay. And what comes next after that?
Nothing.
Yeah, just took time off?
You just give, after, I thought you meant after that phase of it. Yeah. Usually nothing. Usually no influence. Usually no change. So I did that, and then I went to grad school.
Story.
Yeah. Then I went to grad school in London, King's
Okay.
College London,
Cool.
and also worked at a different think tank studying the same kind of stuff, but in London, much more international perspective. Did that for a couple of years, then I went to go work for the Defense Department.
Wow. That's intense, man. I mean, I feel like that's intense. I feel like that's got to be, I don't know why in my mind that just seems like that's very like heavy in like a psychological way. And I guess the type of imagery that you see in like movies to me comes up in like the thinking of tracking and, following those kind of organizations. But I guess maybe it's a little bit more.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that there's a bit of that. I like to think that I'm very I'm good at intellectualizing these things. But then when the shit hits the fan and bad stuff starts happening, even if it's nowhere near where I am geographically, I've noticed as I got older, it affects me more personally. So I think when I was younger, I was actually better at intellectualizing it. And the older I get, the worse I am at that, which is a funny thing. You'd think it would go the other way.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Emotional maturity, maybe. Maybe it's a sign of a good thing. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I mean, I can only imagine to me, it just seems like a heavy job. I can't imagine like the scenarios that you're observing or writing about or studying. And it's probably really fascinating to get much more accurate information as to why certain things are happening. Cause I feel like from the outside perspective, it's like, okay, I can watch like CNN or Fox, or like I can dig into maybe like BBC and get a little bit more intellectual, but I don't really have much understanding of any of that world and why all that has blown up literally in the way that it has.
Yeah, I think that was part of it. It was easier to intellectualize when I was just writing about what other people were doing. I think when I went to go work for the government and then worked in Afghanistan, that's when it became a little more real. And that might be part of why I think about it differently the older I get, I guess, is I knew there would be a difference in doing it, practicing it, seeing it in the flesh in person, which is why I sought out the job that I got. But I don't think I anticipated how much it would change the way I viewed these things emotionally.
I'm very curious to learn.
Although I should have
more about that. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Obviously, like I think we all kind of are guilty to a degree of not having empathy for a lot of the things that we see from a distance, from the news, even just things that happen like locally, or now looking at what's happening from a distance in Ukraine. You're just kind of like, I don't really know how to do anything. I'm here still trying to do my work daily. And
well, yeah, let me ask you a question, if that's
sure.
all right. How do you and your friends talk about what's happening in Ukraine? As someone who's not, really connected to that world.
As terrible as it is to say, I really don't. I don't have any conversations about it. I mean, to be fair, for the last 6 weeks, I've kind of been on and off sick and had some health episodes. So I haven't really been socializing too much since like the end of March, and the only things I've really been doing has been podcast episodes where it's really more about conversations in what's going on in like your life, what your life is about. So it doesn't really leave a lot of room for that conversation. And at this point, I feel so fried by any news outlets or any news information that I'm getting that I don't have any idea. I've started to understand, both from like an economic standpoint and a political standpoint, that there's usually so many layers of motivation behind what we're actually seeing that I have no idea what is actually being put on display for like news to scare people, to push a certain narrative, or is actually what's happening. I mean, even in the beginning of the footage of the, fight between Russia and Ukraine, there's like video of I forgot what it was called, like a black blah, blah, blah night kind of fighter pilot that's supposed to be like, taking down all these Russian.
Oh, the Ghost of Kiev.
Yeah. And then
probably wasn't real.
Yeah. And then people say, oh, this isn't real. But on social media, this story travels like, oh man, this amazing fighter pilot in Ukraine. And all of a sudden you're just like, I heard that story. I wanted it, like, it sounded nice. I bought into it. Then all of a sudden I find out it's not real. And 15 other things happen in that way where I'm just like,
yeah. Well, I think in the words of my friend, Michael Kaufman, who we've done a few episodes with on my podcast, as he put it very simply and succinctly, when war starts, government starts to lie.
Yeah.
Whether they're the good guys or the bad guys or the you're not sure guys. The Ukrainian government was faced with a situation where they were at the beginning in a very disadvantageous position vis-a-vis Russia. So they started putting out propaganda that would help rally the population and make international support more likely. So they were disadvantaged at the beginning, not anymore materially, so they needed to seize the information space. So they did that, and I think that it's good that they did that, although it did make it kind of hard to follow what was happening, especially in the opening days of the conflict.
Yeah. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. Those are like the backside dynamics I have no idea about. I mean, obviously I would assume Ukraine against Russia, like, we're just looking at ridiculously different size country, different amounts of money entirely. So from a war perspective, it seems like it's a really unfair battle.
It seemed unfair. I mean, I really thought the Ukrainians, I was not happy about this, but I really thought the Ukrainians were going to get crushed within days. And they really surprised me and a lot of other people, but I definitely got it wrong in terms of the morale of the Ukrainians, the terrible strategy that Russia pursued in the war. I mean, it's pretty remarkable how poorly they performed in battle and their plan. That's all. We don't want to get into down that rabbit hole, but no, I definitely did not expect it to turn out the way that it has. So it's been pretty remarkable to watch all this happening.
How do you track that from your perspective? Like to get that kind of understanding to know the strategies are failing? Is that like, are there certain places that you're tapping in to get your information?
Yeah. So, since after I worked for the Defense Department, I started a company called War on the Rocks. Now it's called Metamorphic Media. War on the Rocks is our flagship publication.
Cool. We
publish defense and foreign policy commentary, podcasts, that kind of thing. So we've built this great network of experts on all sorts of things, to include Eastern European military affairs, Russian military affairs, having a lot of friends in government. So, you get a sense of something. Sometimes it's the wrong thing, right? But you get a sense of what the expert class is thinking about a variety of issues, which is usually really valuable. And it's been really useful in understanding the conflict, at least for me and a lot of our listeners, as it's unfolded in real time. But we definitely, a lot of us didn't expect Russia to perform as poorly as they did.
So where did War on the Rocks come from?
It's all right.
No, it's my fault. Where, like the idea from, so you're working for the government.
Working for the government, was in Afghanistan. Basically, my job was to help the military understand the local population in a very small part of Afghanistan, where most of the world's illegal opium comes from, Helmand province.
Okay.
And I got back.
How'd you land there?
So the program I applied for to work for in the Defense Department, they had teams doing that kind of work in Iraq and Afghanistan. Basically, the logic was you have all these intelligence people focusing on the enemy, but you don't have anyone just focusing on the people and the local politics, agriculture, what they think, what they feel, what they're scared of, religious issues. It's important to understand all those things.
Of course.
And so it was our job to help the military with that. And my team was sort of through a mix of luck and a little bit of elbow grease assigned to work with the British and the Danish forces in southern Helmand, or in central Helmand.
Wow. Okay. So you're there, and what's that experience like? You're meeting with people. You're basically just traveling around and meeting with local people. Is it?
Yeah, going on patrols either by vehicle or foot and just talking to people. Farmers, local political figures, local religious figures, security forces, and just trying to understand what's happening. You know, you show up, you're sort of dressed like this Martian. You're in all this body armor from a very different country than the one that you're in. And so there's a lot of hurdles in terms of having an honest, straightforward conversation.
Of course.
Not to mention they speak an entirely different language, which I studied but didn't have enough time to learn properly, so I relied heavily on my interpreter. That place surprised me until the last day that I was there. There's certain things that I thought I knew very well and came to learn very well, and some of those things I did, but then other things, even on the last day, I can't talk about the specifics, and it's also just too nerdy and not actually that interesting, but that just knocked me on my ass the last day. I mean, trying to understand, you just try to understand, we're in Los Angeles now. Try to have an in-depth understanding of the local political dynamics of just the 2 miles around us.
No
in
way.
Our own country, it's hard.
Yeah.
So I don't know why we thought we could do it in another country that was so different than ours. But so yeah, I did that for 9 months. Then I came back and sort of wallowed, I guess. I wasn't really sure what to do. Jumped back into the think tank world, but didn't really like that. And at around that time, this is around 2012, 2013, there was a lot of changes in the media industry. Online ad revenues went through the roof, and so even niche media outlets that covered things that like music publications, or in my case, foreign policy defense publications, started doubling, tripling, quadrupling, times 10 the amount of content they were publishing. And so most of it became pretty low quality. So I was learning less online from what I was, from places that I used to go to learn things. At the same time, I was learning a lot from friends, mentors, who had been in government, in the military, academics doing important work, usually over drinks in DC, learning a lot from those people. And I thought it'd be nice to recenter that more experience-oriented conversation and bring these experts back to the front. And I started War on the Rocks. The name comes from my friend Raymond Asfor, who I worked with in Helmand. He's a Brit and a great guy. We're still friends today. And I remember going to London, and this is when I first just wanted it to be a podcast, not the publication it turned into. And I said, Ray, I want to start this conversation, but I think Booze and War is too irreverent of a title. So what do I... And we're walking around Piccadilly Circus. We had just had a great meal, great Sunday roast. And he just immediately says, how about War on the Rocks? And I go, that's it.
Yeah. Great name.
Yeah. And he's gotten paid $0 for it.
Nice.
And he will continue to get paid. You hear that, Ray? $0 for it. And, yeah, and that's what we've done. So now we have a variety of podcasts as well. War on the Rocks, the main podcast, is the oldest national security podcast out there.
Cool, man.
And we're starting some new publications. We have another publication we already run with the University of Texas. So, yeah, we've been doing this for almost 9 years now.
Amazing. So the podcast has been largely people you are, like it's mentors, people bringing them in, having conversations.
Yeah, the podcasts are a lot of conversations. Sometimes they're formal, sometimes they're very informal. My favorite ones where it's a group of people around a table having drinks. We've been doing a lot lately focused on Ukraine with Michael, who I mentioned earlier. We'll do things with everything from a table full of experts to members of Congress to Not too long ago, we did one with the head of the Marine Corps, the Commandant of the Marine Corps. We're going to hopefully be doing one with the Chief of the Air Force soon. So it just depends, but we just try to have an unstructured conversation where, we agree beforehand the broad topics that we're going to discuss, but no questions are,
Surprise.
Yeah. No questions are agreed to beforehand. We just agree on topics. So there's no script. There's nothing approved. But yeah.
Cool, man. How's that been going? What's like the process? I mean, 9 years is a long time to be at it and be in that space. And it started as the podcast.
Started as the podcast, developed into the publication, formally launched summer 2013. It took about 3-4 years to figure out how to make money because I didn't have a business ambition.
Yeah.
It was never something that I was out there to do. But then I realized, it was successful in terms of readership and influence. And I realized I needed to figure out a way to keep the lights on because there was really barely any money in it from the beginning. Had a great team of volunteers helping me from the very beginning, it should be said. This was not just a one-man band. And they've gone on to do great things as well. John, my friend John, runs another great publication called the Modern War Institute. Usha, one of our original editors, is writing speeches for the Secretary of Defense right now.
Wow.
Lauren Katzenberg was a big shot editor of the New York Times now, so they've all gone on to do great things. There's others, but
pretty great volunteer group.
Pretty great group. And we just it took a while to figure out the business side of things, but we did. We're doing pretty well. We got some great things ahead for the next year or two, some new projects. So I'm excited.
What was the process in like figuring out the business aspect? Like, where did you see first money start to come from? Was it something that was like just solely in advertising? Was the podcast when you first started it audio, video, or what was the format for it?
Just audio. I don't like doing the video for my shows because I like being able to look like a schlub, I guess, when I record. But I wish I could say there was a process in terms of the business. I mean, there was in terms of, I think like a lot of startups, it's really just about doing a series of tests and seeing what works. So had an early hypothesis that it would be ads, but for a variety of reasons, ads was not the right play for us at the beginning. And so that didn't work out. So then we tried something else. And then I tried a membership program that worked pretty well. And we also do these partnerships with other organizations to help them build brands. So we did that with the University of Texas, with the publication we run for them called the Texas National Security Review, which is in print and online. And so we're doing that with a couple other organizations now. We're trying to find what's the niche, what's the thing that your organization wants to accomplish that we can help you with in terms of building a media property.
Nice.
And that's the other side of our business. There's the memberships, then there's the other side. And we're probably going to take a step back into advertising sometime later this year.
And where do you see like the growth? Do you have a vision for like where you want it to grow, or is it really just a matter of like this is just kind of naturally the progression that things take? And like, do you have goals of seeing it become eventually like a TV type network? Is it better to keep it controlled in your own environment? Is there like a 3 year, 5 year, 10 year, like, oh man, I really hope that we get to this point? Or is it just like we're rolling?
Probably never TV, because I think TV is the dumbest medium. Although there have been a couple of people that want to adapt some of our articles into shows, but for most of our articles that'd be very hard to do because it's honestly very wonky stuff. It's like for insiders by insiders. I think most people would have a lot of trouble following along in most of those articles just because it's very niche. Just like in your industry, there's niche stuff that I think would be hard for people to understand, hard for me to understand.
Sure.
And it's a constant struggle to get our writers to try to write in a way that normal people can understand because they're dug in their professional niche. But as far as the plan, we'll see. I have some ambitions. I don't really want to talk about them publicly, but we'll see where things go. I'm not going to do this forever.
Yeah.
But at the same time, even if I'm not doing this anymore, it's important to me that whoever or whatever is running it believes in the mission and doesn't just view it as a way to generate revenue, which it is, and it does that well. But it's important to me that that person also believes in the mission as well. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, that's the most important thing, man. I get it. I mean, with the studio and my history here, it's very much the same way in that I'm slowly taking side steps out the door, and I'm looking for the crew that's going to actually take this place over with the same soul and the same spirit and the same generosity that I feel like has built this place, and the attitude of serving the artist community over making money. Like, obviously I can make a lot of money if I just set the rates a little lower and just crank this place 24/7, but it doesn't help the industry in the way that I would want. You know, like I don't think the industry just needs more money or more music. I mean, we are already flooded with so much fucking music. So I think identifying the types of qualities, characteristics that we're looking for to help support in music, type of songwriting, subject matter, things that actually hopefully provoke like introspective thought and like make people feel good and enjoy the music and or have a good story, like just become flooded with bullshit, you know.
Sounds like we have very similar attitudes towards our businesses. Is the most important thing is really high quality.
Yeah, that's it. You know, for me, I mean, that's what excites me. I'm sure in the same way that's got to be the same for you. You know, I mean, I don't really listen to music that's made outside of here anymore, which is an interesting relationship to music. That's another reason why.
Just because of time issue?
Mostly a time issue. I don't know if it's like become something that I've just like worked on so much music that I've disconnected from the outside world in a way. Yeah. And I've also like developed a weird loving relationship of like the craftsmanship of the music. And then I have a bond to the music from that perspective. So like, oh, I engineered this song. It's got like a certain endearment that I have regardless of even if I like the song, you know, and it makes me have this weird relationship with music that's no longer like a common thing I can connect with other people over. You know, like I don't listen to radio. I never really have. Wasn't a big thing in Utah. Like Park City, the radio stations honestly didn't even reach. So I didn't grow up with like the same kind of soundtrack that everybody grew up with. I grew up with the music that my parents would play in the house. You know, it's just like Italian opera or the Bee Gees or something, you know. So I got a bit of a different musical upbringing than like 99% of people.
What's like the ultimate song where the first memory trigger for you is being in the car with your parents?
I have a few actually. James Taylor, You've Got a Friend. My mom would try to pay me to sing that. She would like literally try to give me like $1 or $5 if I'd like sing during the chorus. She'd be like, all right, here's coming. You want some money? And Andre Bocelli, I don't know the name of the song in Italian, but it's the Time to Say Goodbye song. And my dad would play that, you know, all the time. I mean, so much so that in our house waking up also, like our house had like speakers throughout the house. It was always the thing my dad was into. And that a lot of the time would just be like how I was woken up, you know, like my dad would just start playing that in our house.
Not a bad alarm clock.
No, honestly, it's like I have a really, really, really deep connection to that song for many reasons. And those are the main two. I wish I could sing along to that one, but
yeah, not a lot of people can.
How about you?
Pretty much any Johnny Cash song.
Okay.
So I don't know if they played it all the time or if it was just for a certain period of my life, but it just made me think of road trips, like whether we're going to Mammoth to go skiing or somewhere. It just made me think of being in the car with my parents. Pretty much, I think they just had Johnny Cash Greatest Hits or something like that, and they just played it over and over.
Interesting. That's not a person I would have at all associated to your parents.
If you just met them, you wouldn't guess that either, but they went through a big Johnny Cash phase, yeah.
Huh, cool. Who was it? Was both of them? Were they both into it?
I think so.
Okay.
I think so.
Yeah, he's a career I don't really actually know that much about. You know, I mean, I know he's like just an icon, and I know his songwriting is phenomenal. I only know a handful of songs that like even come to mind for me with him, but I definitely miss like the prime of like his start of his career and on, you know, for obvious reasons of not being born, but at that time. But the later stuff, I just always loved his voice. His voice is so incredible.
Incredible, yeah.
Cool. Well, so what's your daily routine?
Wake up, hop on email.
What time are you getting up?
It depends. I'm usually up around 6:30.
Okay.
Hop on email almost immediately. Shower or do a little exercise, shower, get back on email. You know, COVID disrupted a lot of things. We used to have an office. We don't anymore. We're probably going to move back into an office now that COVID's not over, but whatever. It's just time to get back into an office. But now I have a couple cafes in my neighborhood that I go to. We have regularly scheduled calls with staff. We're doing back in-person meetings for business stuff. So basically, coffee shops, my email, my inbox. Well, it's actually 5 different inboxes right now, which is another story. And business meetings.
Okay.
So, and spreadsheets. That's another thing. When you start a business, you don't realize how much time you're going to spend in Microsoft Excel.
Yeah.
But
For me, Google Docs, but yeah, same deal. I'm running mine just from the cloud like that in case I need to move it around. But yeah, it's a lot. It's
a lot.
A lot of time in spreadsheets.
Yeah.
Are you still living in DC?
Yeah, I live on the hill, and I have a place out in West Virginia as well that I bought a couple years ago.
Sweet. How'd you find that place?
For a long time, this was a pre-COVID idea that COVID improved upon, but I've always lived in cities my entire life, and it was important for me to get out of work mentally and physically. I came to understand that I can't just grind all the time, which I used to do, and that was just not sustainable for a variety of reasons.
Sure.
And so I started thinking what I could do to create better mental habits, create better physical habits, and intellectual habits, which I think is different from mental habits.
Yeah.
And I focused in on this idea of buying a rural property and getting out in nature. And West Virginia is not super close to DC, but it's also not super far. There's some parts of West Virginia that are about an hour and a half from DC. The part I'm in is 4.5 hours away, so it's further. But I wanted it to be a little further away, so I wouldn't just treat it as like a weekend spot or
sure.
In nighttime going out there for just really short trips. I wanted to find a place that was far enough from DC where I would go out there and I'd be out there for at least a week or 2 weeks or so. And so I settled in on this one part of West Virginia where land is beautiful, also very affordable.
Cool.
And got a nice little mountaintop spot there where there's barely any evidence of human civilization. So it's just a great place to go. But I'm connected thanks to Starlink. Thanks, Elon. Amazing technology. But yeah, it's great.
What's your goal with that place? Is that something that eventually you want to develop any kind of like farm or garden? Is it got any kind of sustainable living things going for it? Or I guess the climate's a little bit rough through the winter.
Yeah, you could do seasonal farms, but on that mountaintop, it gets down to about the high teens, low 20s in the winter. So it's kind of hard for crops to survive year round. But there's evidence of old farms up there. I mean, I'm talking about really old that go like old cornfields, and the last owner had a really nice garden that I have not kept up. So maybe there's a lot to do with that land. I consider it a lifetime project because I'm never going to sell it, and there's just so much you can do with it. And it's 80-something acres. People always ask, what do you do with all that land? Most of it you just leave alone. It's a forest. You don't do anything with it. You
just
walk
enjoy,
through it.
Yeah. Enjoy being on it.
And so that's the nice thing about it is I don't really need to do anything with it. Maybe I'll do a garden one day. We'll see. Maybe get a dog up there, but we'll see.
Nice. That's exciting, man. Have you found any time outside of your job for any kind of hobbies, things like that at this point?
Yeah, I do minor woodworking, nothing groundbreaking, nothing.
Okay.
I wouldn't say I'm great at it, but whittling, I make bookshelves, make picture frames, things like that.
Sweet.
Yeah.
That's cool. Is that like when you're in West Virginia, that's kind of like the pastime?
And in DC. I mean, it's
cool.
nice because, and I think a friend of mine, fly fishing is his version of this, is when you're doing it, you can't really focus on anything else. Yeah. Because you need to make sure, one, you don't like cut your thumb off.
Totally.
Which I've almost done.
Okay.
And, and two, you got to make sure that it turns out right. So you just really have to focus on that. So it's the best way for me to make sure that I'm not checking my emails for a couple hours is that I get in just a different mental space. And I used to get that from reading, but so much of the reading I do, even when it's not directly connected to my work, still makes me think about work because my work is about the world. Yeah. And so whether it's history or even a character in the novel, sometimes I'll just get connected back. This like hand reaches through a portal and drags me back to work. But when you're woodworking, you don't get that. So
that's cool.
It's a nice little escape.
Yeah. Any of those activities to me, that's like the best things in life. Like when you get the opportunity to just kind of get pulled back through the portal the other way, and now you're like in the activity and you're not being bothered by anything else.
Exactly. Do you have something like that?
Couple things. Most recently, I would say reconnected heavily with golf, which obviously, is one of those things you can start thinking about other things, but the moment you lose that, just direct focus in what you're doing, things start to fall apart, So for me, it's one of those things. It's a long time too. If you go out and play 18 somewhere, you could be out on a golf course for 5 hours or something like that. And so you just get that time to basically just focus on having the best round of golf you can possibly have. I wanted to be pro when I was younger. So for me to reconnect with it, it's a lot of layers to, rebuilding the muscle memory, figuring out what muscles I need to actually start and go back to the gym and build muscles. I lost a lot of muscle and just from COVID and time, and more recently with like health issues that have just been kind of setbacks that I can't like be in the gym. But playing golf and riding my motorcycle are like the two main things. Here it's like I go up in the canyons in Malibu, and same thing. I mean,
I've seen people do that. You must have real high risk tolerance because that is the risk of it. What I do is you cut a finger. The risk of what you do is you drive off a cliff or something like that.
Yeah,
So,
or you get hit by a car or somebody else coming the other way who's just racing and raging. You know, it's intense. You know, I mean, it is definitely intense because you're up there with other people who are rallying pretty hard in cars and motorcycles, and all it takes is like you're both coming around a corner and somebody's inside and somebody's outside, and you know, game over.
Someone's checking their phone for the wrong half second. Or,
I mean, in most of those canyons, it's not so bad because everybody there is like pretty high level enthusiast, you know. But you do get people who are just fucking idiots. And it's like, man, today's not the day to like just be popping wheelies and endos and doing all this stuff in front of a big group of people. And like, we don't need to cause an accident, man. We're out here like having fun, you know? So that's really been the two things that I've found. You know, I got so obsessed with this place and with building the studio and acquiring equipment all this time, you know, and wanting the studio to push a little bit harder this way and this way and this way, that you just look up and it's like, fuck, like 14 years of like being in basically like a room for the most part, you know. And I love it, obsessively love it. It's almost like a dangerous obsession or addiction at this point. And so I've been trying to figure out how I can execute balance and like make sure I have this much time for golf or motorcycle rides, or like I was working 7 days a week, and then when my parents moved back here, we started to do like a Sunday family day, and that was my first time being like, oh, I can have Sundays. Cool. You know, and then from there, I'm still now to this day kind of like wrestling for like Saturdays. So I have like an actual weekend. And then it became like, well, I need a day during the week so that I can actually catch up on things that are like things I just need to do, you know, where businesses may be closed, if it's a health insurance thing or blah, 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 whatever it is, you know, like when
life.
I just get caught up because I also have like a creative mind, and I have a lot of people I talk to. Like if I have a list of things to do, like I have just a ridiculous amount of like sticky notes with things on them everywhere, and to-do lists on my computer and my phone and reminders. And it just gets to the point where it's just like, fuck, like I have to start just annihilating all this backed up stuff to be able to move forward. But then I might meet an artist and be like, oh my God, this person's amazing. Let's make an album. Let's start on Tuesday, you know? And then all of a sudden, all that shit is just kind of like pushed back, and I'm just like in it for, you know, enjoying making that music. So I haven't really figured out how to get the balance in place, but that's my short-term goal. And so I hired a studio manager, this girl named Brie Lawson. She's awesome. She's been killing it so far. Going to pick up a few engineers and just start to build like a small staff here, and then hopefully expand that with like, you know, photo, video people who can document things that are happening in the studio, and
nice.
Eventually like a writer to blog take over. Like I was doing all this shit, man. Like taking pictures during sessions, trying to make videos during sessions, trying to have people come in, do like live performance videos, post it all online. Now with the podcast, that's like a whole other thing. And you just realize
you needed a new project. So
here
we're podcasting.
Yeah. And that's, you know, that becomes another difficulty, is like prioritizing time, you know. But I've realized more and more so with recent events that like, I think this is probably the most important thing to me right now. I've been really enjoying the like art of the conversation, and like kind of more so moving into like documenting people's lives, which is what I'm super fascinated by with this project. So,
yeah. What was your, when you originally started the show, what was your vision for the podcast, and how has it changed or not changed?
I wouldn't say it's changed. I mean, I'm trying to constantly like in real time get feedback from every guest and friends. And even now I'm getting feedback from people online to try to figure out what questions I can ask to make things better, and, you know, how to dial in and have interesting questions on hand, because we burn through a lot of this stuff pretty quickly. And I realize there's probably a lot of stuff that you can't necessarily go into too much detail about. So I can't really like go
No, you
through
could
all
ask.
that stuff.
Most of it I can.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Whatever
We
you
can
want.
double back on some of it. But at this point, I feel like the goal was really just to start having conversations with people. Like, you went upstairs, you saw I have the Polaroid wall. I've made a lot of music with a lot of people, and there isn't really like context behind it. And I feel like a lot of the interviews that those people are in are, hey, tell me about your album. Who's on your album? Who, was a part of your album? Or when are you going on tour? And what are the tour dates? It's not really like, who are you as a person? Where'd you grow up? What was your life like?
Mm-hmm.
What are you into? What hobbies are you into? So I'm super interested in learning about my favorite artists and getting more of that storyline. And I love the idea of like having them tell the story. So right now I'm in the process of trying to figure that out. I also am trying to incorporate the like startup entrepreneurship path to success part of the story as well, which is why I was kind of curious about the details from you experiencing like, oh, I'm starting this project and I'm figuring out where revenue comes from. And these were my first successes. And I like learning about that and more so about the failures too. Like I find that stuff to be super fascinating. And a lot of people have come in here and told their musical start and first chapters or all the way through to success. And there's just been so many interesting ways that people approached getting things off the ground.
Yeah.
And I love that. I'm super fascinated by all that stuff. So that was where it originally started. And then I just started thinking about other things I could build out as a network in terms of other like channels, so to speak, or other programs. And one of them, which I was really excited to do, is called My Dad's Friends, because my dad has this like literally group in his phone of like crazy friends. And I really was hoping that he and I would kind of have this like later in life project for him to come in, like see his friends. Cause like I've been really enjoying doing these because I either see people I haven't seen in a long time or may see people I don't know that well. And it has been a really enjoyable conversation. For him, I felt like it would have been so much fun to go through, 40-year, 50-year long friendships. And some of his friends have been super successful and have really interesting lives. And they've been people who've been instrumental in raising me. And so that was another one that since he passed, I'm still now trying to figure out, like I plan to just do that by myself. And if I can lasso my mom into coming to co-host a couple with me, then
That'd be great.
Oh man, she's so funny. She's so funny. We've been spending so much time together. I mean, for the last like year and a half, but really more so the last like 6 months. And just like even her life story is just so fucking crazy to me. Like she's done so much stuff and she keeps dropping all these little stories on me every now and again. And I'm just like, what the fuck? Like
I was talking about this phenomenon with some friends recently, is that you feel like you know your parents, and there's nothing recent that happened with my parents on this, but just throughout my life, it's like something will drop and it's like, you lived in Hawaii? What? Or like, you were in Europe for 2 years? What were you doing? Or like something will just come out where you're like, you realize your parents have not told you the full story.
Yeah.
Especially like their 20s, I
Yeah.
think, is that. And sometimes for good reasons. They haven't told you that. But it's funny how you never really get the full story, or you have to really, really pull it out of them.
Yeah. And it's difficult for me because like now that I've started this project, it's like I have conversations with people regularly, and then I just start to think like, oh man, that would be a great story. Oh, I got to save that, figure out how to refer that back to make it into the, documented space. Cause I don't know, it became a weird thing to me, especially with losing my dad. It's like people kind of just vanish, I mean, my dad obviously like touched a lot of people's lives and like changed a lot of people's lives. And I think all those people will forever be thankful for that. But I wish that there was more of him that was like documented digitally so that I could go back and watch that. And eventually, like when I have kids, share that with my kids so that, they got more insight from him.
Yeah, I think that'd be a great project. And I know some of your parents' friends. I know they would love to do something like that.
Yeah, it's just a matter of finding time. I have one scheduled. Hopefully this month I'm going to drive to Arizona because he's not really mobile at the moment. But Billy Kapler is like one of my dad's like longest standing friends. He's my godfather, and he's like literally been a second dad to me and like one of the smartest people I know. And it's just like things like that I just really look forward to being able to capture, and it's like in the event that I die, I'd be excited that all this stuff will live on in perpetuity beyond me, and I love the idea that people can get information from this that could potentially change their lives, their careers, be helpful in that way. So there's a lot of layers to it, honestly, when I think about the goals for this. And just honestly, I think the biggest thing I've realized is I've met so many people. Like, I mean, at this point, it's got to be in like the thousands just through work and sessions. And, I'm a pretty personal person. So when I meet somebody, we dive into things pretty much right away. But it's nice to really have like sit down. Nothing's like focused. Sometimes when you're having sessions, you're somewhat acting like a psychiatrist, helping somebody work through like a mental hurdle thing that they're dealing with in life, because the goal is to channel that and figure out how to tell that as a story to make a song. So you're having these conversations kind of trying to extract from a person like, oh, that's an interesting thing you just said. That's a cool phrase. That might work as a song title. That might work as an entry point. Mm-hmm. So you're focused on that a bit more. Like you kind of have an agenda. Whereas this is like, I'm focused on like having a conversation with you, having a conversation with the guest when I'm here doing a podcast.
But I don't know, it reminds me of, a lot of my job still to this day is being an editor. And so, but with words, written words.
Yeah.
Sometimes I identify with what you just said on a lot of that. Although our kind of writing is less personal inherently, it's more analytical, but I still can't turn it off. I'll be out with a friend of mine who writes for us, and he'll say something, and even if we're not talking about work, I'm like, that would be a great article. That'd be a good title. Like, so when you said that, I was like, it's amazing how similar in some ways what we do, even though it's totally different in some ways, also very similar.
Yeah, but it's driven by passion. If it's like something you're really fixated on doing right and delivering, and it's something you obsess about, obviously, I mean, you're very deep in it, and like even before the podcast, your whole life has been around the subject matter.
A lot of my adult life, certainly. Yeah.
Yeah. So going back into like things with work, have there been any experiences or stories where you've had these like aha moments figuring out something is like either a much bigger deal than we were aware of it being, or a storyline that we were told through like media is actually not the storyline?
I don't really have a sort of sexy or a conspiratorial answer for that. I'll say a few things that get to, I think, the issue that animates that question maybe, and then I'll tell some stories. One is whenever I hear someone saying, well, I think this is a conspiracy, or the government's doing this and they're saying they're doing this and they're really doing that. I wish I could give everyone the experience of working in government for just like 2 weeks, so they can see how cumbersome and frankly incompetent and poorly run most of these institutions are. Like certainly to the extent where there's lots of things government institutions do well, but the idea of them orchestrating these conspiracies that some people have in mind is just fantastical to me, having seen a lot of it up close. Narratives get presented that are certainly different. So one thing that struck me was when I got back from being in Afghanistan, and while I was there, I read the press, but not closely. I was mostly just focused on, I was working all day, every day. There's no weekends there. There's nothing to do but work. You're in a war zone. And I got back to DC, and it just struck me that the narrative of what was happening in Afghanistan, back in Washington and the rest of the country, was so foreign to what was actually happening on the ground based on what I saw. So in America, everyone was talking about, this is about us aligned with the government versus the Taliban. And we are there to bring democracy and rights for women. And what I saw on the ground was, one, the Taliban at the time especially was such a diverse and fractured movement. And it wasn't really about the Taliban. It was about a group called the Taliban that was able to aggregate all these little micro conflicts. Like, you are in a fight with your neighbor over who owns that piece of land, and it's been going on for generations. And you might choose to fight with the Taliban because you feel like they can help solve it in your favor, and he might join the police for the same reason. So a lot of this, what side they identified with was often not for any ideological commitment, or like, I want to be on the good guy side or the bad. I mean, everyone thinks they're on the good side. It was something very local. This all politics is local phrase applies in war zones too. And also this idea that we were on the side of the government, whereas what I saw was most of the problems we had in Afghanistan were to do with the government. They were heavily corrupt, heavily implicated in the heroin industry, industrial scale child rapists, which barely got discussed in America for a lot of the war. It started getting discussed in America finally later in the war, but I'm telling you, it's like from your worst nightmares. And a lot of that just didn't carry over. We needed a more simplistic narrative. And that's not out of any sort of deliberate government sense of we can't tell the Americans the truth. I think some of that is we can't expect the American people to understand all the nuances, which is probably true. But it's also true that even government leaders didn't accept and understand those nuances, especially at the highest levels. And so that's, I think, probably the best example I can give you. So it's not like...
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Oh no, it makes.
I knew I just threw a lot out there.
Yeah, no, I'm full deer in the headlights to that, because just to hear but that's point in case, right? And for me, I guess I think about that, and I also think about where you started that conversation with like the government being incapable of orchestrating conspiracy theory at the level we're all kind of assuming they are, and I wonder, like, we all kind of look at the government and insist that it's just this broken, defunct piece of shit at this point. I mean, it's kind of sad to see it, but I have completely ejected from paying attention on any level. And I feel like I am looking at other countries for where I want to move to spend the rest of my life at this point. I look at like what's happening here, and I feel like this is not the country for me. This is like not a country that like represents my interests. Like, especially now, it's now coming back into the abortion conversations, popping back up on the table. And I'm just like, where the fuck are we? And why are we still drawing on these like old issues? And now, instead of making progress to what we could hopefully have like a better, more sustainable country that's like, less economically demanding of people, maybe supplies people better resources to food that's affordable, that's nutritious, that helps alleviate all this crazy shit we're caught in with like the healthcare system and people being sick perpetually and being charged like insane amounts of money for pharmaceutical shit. Like, the list is just so deep and like so difficult to wrap my head around. And I don't know, if that's like it gets better from here kind of thing, because eventually, like, I'd see Elon Musk talk about it recently, and it caught my attention that like there's no maximum age limit to people being in politics, where there's a minimum age limit. And back obviously in whatever, like 1700s, like people didn't live to be older than like 50, 40. So like there wasn't really a chance that you would have people in their 70s.
Well, that's not true. People could live a long time.
I mean, sure,
then,
but like
yeah.
I think,
but not as long as generally as a group. But you're right, I get it. And also, people forget. It's funny. It's a little crazy to think that both this president and the last president are both older than Bill Clinton is now, and Bill Clinton was president many years ago.
Yeah.
So that kind of stuff is a little weird to think about. I do think our politics are broken in a bunch of ways, and I don't want to get too much into this. So what I'll just say is that I think both sides, in their own ugly ways, and I think we're mostly seeing this on the right, but it also happens on the left, are sort of addicted to the politics of culture wars.
Yeah.
And instead of focusing on solving real problems, and even when they do solve real problems, like, the infrastructure bill is a huge deal. They want to get past it and talk about the next thing as soon as possible, even the side that passed it. And they want to talk about something that is, anyway. And I just don't see that cycle lifting anytime soon. It's very depressing. I live in Washington, and so I see it up close, and it's just as ugly, if not even uglier, up close as it seems from here. So.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I mean, and is that something that you like? Are you following stories in that close of a manner to like what's happening here, or are you still focused on a lot of stories that are happening around the world?
I follow it all. I mean, I work in a very politics adjacent business.
Okay.
We're not in politics, but we're very close to it, obviously.
Right.
And I follow politics very closely, but I try to focus my professional energies on foreign policy, defense policy, and that's also very political stuff that ties to domestic politics as well. I mean, as contentious as the trans issue is for some people anyway, in the rest of society, it's also something that it gets into military personnel policy. So it's not like you can wall these things off.
Yeah.
But to the extent that I can, mostly from my own personal sanity, I really try to focus on the subject matter that, that comprises what I do for a living.
Sure.
Which is, you can't ignore it, and I don't want to ignore the rest of it. But it's just... it's infuriating to watch what's happening in this country, and has been especially for the last, I'd say, 10, 12 years in terms of the direction of our politics.
Yeah.
And you could argue it started in the early 90s with Newt Gingrich, but I don't have the energy to stay engaged. Some people have the energy to have their face up to everyone else's shit all the time, and I just don't. I have to disengage sometimes and pull off into something else.
Yeah. Is there, with your work, or just in terms of like things that you're passionate about, do you ever look at like certain objectives and things that you're fixated on trying to provide like information to help make change in any particular places? Or is it really just a matter of trying to digest the information and present it to people in a semi-neutral way?
Our mission is, it's not necessarily to be neutral, but our mission is to stoke and provoke a better strategic conversation. And that takes a lot of forms. But the most important part of that is creating a space for people to have an honest, evidence-based disagreement. So we'll publish articles where people disagree with each other, debate each other. I don't agree with a lot of the stuff we publish. I don't even read some of the stuff that we publish until it's out. I mean, I don't edit everything. I have a staff, and I have a great team. But it's important for me that we have that space, and we could publish something that I think is just totally wrong. But as long as there's facts that they're based on, and even if they come to a different conclusion, it's just, as long as there's evidence, that's what's important to me. And so we try to be nonpartisan, which isn't to say that we don't publish things that are partisan, because sometimes we do, but we just create room for both. And we survey on this, and it's really encouraging to see that year after year, our audience generally, even those who are huge partisans in their own right, whether they're very pro-Trump or very pro-Democrat, huge majorities of both of those groups believe that we're politically neutral, which is where I try to position us.
Great.
So
what's the process in like fact checking at this point? Like, is there a certain number of verifications that you need from a journalist, or like, how do you...
We don't generally publish journalists so much as people who have done it for a living in some way, but we just make them source their factual claims. So all factual claims need to go to a link, and it can't be Wikipedia, and it can't be some fringe crazy website. It has to be something where it proves what they're saying.
Yeah. And
we since we're not journalists, we don't allow people to quote, unnamed Western sources. There's no unnamed government sources. Sometimes especially in other countries, and especially in authoritarian regimes, we'll allow researchers to quote those people, but doesn't happen often. And we always have a phone conversation with them about it, so we know who the person is, who they're talking to, and we try to understand that. But generally, everyone has to have it right there in a hyperlink, so everyone else can check their homework for them.
Yeah, that to me is another factor in like what I was kind of saying earlier. For me, I just disconnect because I feel like, I don't know. I haven't seen like a verification badge on a website for me that makes me think, okay, cool, this is actually factual information. And like from basically Trump's probably campaign for presidency forward, I mean, I thought, yeah, this guy's fucking crazy, and a lot of the things he's saying is fucking crazy. And then I realized a lot of things are taken out of context, and I may have a total misunderstanding of what's actually happening. So for me, that was like a weird revelation of like, I can't trust this stuff. I feel like people are here to just make us confused in a way. And, that may be the way that they're winning votes, or swaying people just to get somebody angry or emotional about something and not actually take like a policy consideration correctly.
Yeah. I mean, the incentives to whatever side you're on, this is in both parties.
Yeah, for sure.
The incentives to lie and misrepresent things for short-term electoral gain are huge, especially if you're a member of the House, because they have to run every 2 years. And so they have to keep people amped up on their side
Yeah.
constantly by saying things that they know are either partial lies or full out lies. And so they can raise money and get people stoked and get people voting. And then that creates its own logic, because it's not like you just lie and then it goes away and you're like, all right, back to business, back to serious conversations. No, it just keeps spinning up and spinning up and spinning up. And so I'm not saying anything particularly novel or unique here, but that's just sort of the cycle that's at the bottom of our messed up politics right now.
Is there anything that, like, in your mind that gives us the chance to have change from that? Like, that's the one thing that drives me craziest, is I feel like there's no accountability. So there's no reason for anybody to stop doing that, you know?
Well, there is accountability. There are elections, but...
Yeah, but they seem to always kind of continue to skate past that. And if to follow back on, like, you know, okay, if we're going through election cycles, but every single time I'm lying to you to convince you to, you know, vote for me, then...
And if districts are gerrymandered, so there's not actually a lot of competitive House districts in the country, because the way they draw the district maps. And yeah, it's a real problem. I don't know the way out of it. I sort of, I mean, I love this country. It's hard for me to imagine living somewhere else. But what you said earlier about, I don't know if I want to live here anymore. I think a lot of people think about that. A lot of people are like, I'm just tired of this stuff. But I've lived in other countries, and believe me, they have their own screwed up issues too. So
yeah, I mean,
as screwed up as ours, maybe more screwed up than most democracies now. But I feel very fortunate that I was born here, and this was illustrated just recently when we did a prisoner exchange with Russia recently, where they released this American who went over to Russia for some educational program, and he got too drunk and he was running down the road, and these cops got him and put him in the car, and they claim that he swung at them in the car or something, and maybe he did, and he was in prison and being treated very poorly physically, you know, really bad health, and we wanted that guy out, and they wanted an international drug trafficker out. That's who Russia wanted to get out of prison. So it tells you a lot about each country, is who they're trying to help, right?
Yeah.
But so I try to focus on the fundamental goodness about, we still have a lot of good stuff in place in the fundamentals, but it's hard not to get dispirited and cynical.
Yeah.
So I too fantasize about fleeing, and that's part of what West Virginia is I can go out there for a couple weeks and pretend that there's no one else in the universe, at least when I'm not on my email. So
yeah, that's exciting, man. That's very cool. Well, I think we covered quite a lot. I don't know if there's anything in your mind that you feel like is a story or an instrumental thing to part of your life that, you know, was a great thing that you want to throw down on this, but I feel like that we covered a pretty great amount of stuff here.
I think we got it.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, man. War on the Rocks, for people who want to check out everything you've been doing for the last 9 years plus. And yeah, that's a wrap.
That's a wrap. It was good. Thanks, man.
Yeah, thank you.